Tonight on Fear NOX, we stage up where gravel turns to leaves and the map pins lie. Trailhead kiosks with damp paper under plex, footbridges slick with moss, and parking lots where clock faces don't match the ranger log. These 10 accounts come from rangers, trail crews, EMTs, and hikers who kept notes when batteries went warm in cold air. Appalachian ridge lines to Pacific Northwest timber. Shoulder season into early frost. We follow mile counts that add up twice. Radio checks that answer late. And headlamps seen from inside closed shelters. No spoilers. Just enough to keep you on the line and out of the creek. Subscribe and hit the bell. If you've ever signed a kiosk after dark, this one's for you. These are real voices, real places. Listen close. Drop your story below. We read them all. All right. Let's get into it. I've been a ranger for 12 years, patrolling the high country trails of the northern Cascades. My beat covers a network of trailheads, primitive campsites, and a few fire lookout points. It's a job built on routine, observation, and the quiet understanding that the wilderness doesn't care about schedules. My gear is standard issue. GPS, headlamp, first aid pack, and the ever-present radio. But the most important tool, often, is the humble sign-in kiosk log. Hikers are supposed to use it. It's a simple system. Name, destination, estimated return. Most do. It's our first line of defense. A paper trail that tells us who's out there and when to start worrying. Without it, finding someone in these mountains is like finding a specific snowflake in a blizzard. My shift that evening was winding down, the sun already dipping behind the western ridges, pulling long, cold shadows across the valley. My last check was the Lost Creek Trailhead, a popular but remote access point. It was late October. The air had a bite that promised snow. I pulled into the gravel lot, the crunch of tires loud in the deepening quiet. Only one vehicle remained, a dark sedan, parked neatly by the kiosk. Its presence at this hour, coupled with the plummeting temperatures, immediately flagged it for attention. Standard procedure. I killed my engine, grabbed my headlamp, and walked over to the kiosk. The logbook was secured in its waterproof box. I unlatched it, clicked on my headlamp, and flipped to the last page. The most recent entry caught my eye instantly. It was dated today. Destination, Ridge Spur. Estimated return, 2000. The name, handwritten in a looping, almost elegant script, was generic enough to be a placeholder, but the time was 1742. A bit late to start a ridge hike, especially with sunset at 1815, but not impossible. Then, directly below it, another entry. Same destination. I stared at it. 2 entries, 18 minutes apart by the same hand, for the same person, to the same destination. My first thought, a fleeting one, was that I'd misread the first time, maybe mistaking a sign out for a sign in. But no, both were clearly marked in. It was an immediate violation of the log's purpose. Why would someone sign in twice? Did they forget something and restart? But why use the same handwriting if they were just correcting an error? The log was meant to be a clear, sequential record, not a scribble pad. This was a direct contradiction to the system I relied on. I walked over to the sedan. My palm pressed against the hood. Cold. Not just cool, but thoroughly chilled, the metal radiating the ambient temperature of the evening. It felt like it had been sitting there for hours, not minutes. Yet, when I ran my glove across the dust film, a clear, fresh swipe mark appeared. Someone had touched the hood recently. How could the engine be cold, suggesting a long period of inactivity, but the dust disturbed just moments ago? The two facts didn't reconcile. It was like finding a freshly lit campfire with cold ashes. I pulled out my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger 1. I'm at the Lost Creek Trailhead. I have a vehicle, dark sedan, license plate, redacted for privacy. One hiker signed in twice. Same name, same handwriting, at 1742 and 1800. Vehicle appears cold but has fresh contact marks on the hood. Requesting a plate check and status update." The radio crackled back. "Ranger 1, dispatch. Copy plate check request. Vehicle registered to redacted for privacy. No flags. Your transmission received at 1758. Stand by for further." I glanced at my watch. It read 1802. My transmission had been received at 1758? That was 4 minutes before I even made the call. I felt a prickle of unease. My watch was always accurate, synchronized daily with the atomic clock. I checked the display on my radio too. It showed 1802. "Dispatch," I called again, trying to keep my voice even. "Confirming your last transmission time. My time is 1802. You logged my call at 1758? A slight pause. "Affirmative, Ranger 1. Your last transmission logged at 1758. Is there an issue with your equipment?" "Negative, dispatch. Just confirming. Stand by." My stomach tightened. The kiosk log, the car, now the radio. Each piece of information, when cross-referenced, actively contradicted the others. My training screamed at me to follow protocol. Overdue hiker, late start, contradictory evidence. A ground search was warranted. I grabbed my pack, double-checked my headlamp, and set off up the trail. The air grew colder as I gained elevation. The trail wound through old-growth fir, the needles soft and damp underfoot. I reached the footbridge over Lost Creek, its wooden planks slick with dew. The stream gurgled below, a constant, indifferent sound. I scanned the banks, the trail ahead, but saw nothing out of place. No discarded wrappers, no broken branches. The silence was profound, broken only by the creek and my own breathing. I remembered a winter night years ago, standing on this very bridge. The stars so sharp and numerous they seemed painted onto velvet. It had been so still, so peaceful. Tonight, the stillness felt heavy, watchful. I continued, pushing towards the ridge spur. The ground here was firmer, less prone to holding prints, but the temperature had dropped significantly. A thin layer of frost had begun to form on the exposed roots and fallen leaves. I clicked my headlamp to its highest setting, sweeping the beam across the path, and then I saw them. Footprints. Distinct, boot-sized impressions in the nascent frost. They were heading down the trail. I knelt, examining them closely. The pattern was clear, a standard hiking boot, consistent with what I'd expect from a solo hiker. But there was the problem. I could only find prints heading back towards the trailhead. Not a single clear impression of someone walking up the trail. I walked 100 yards further, then another. I circled back, meticulously scanning the ground, even venturing off-trail into the undergrowth where the frost was thicker. Nothing. Just the prints of someone returning, perfectly preserved in the delicate ice. It was as if the hiker had materialized on the ridge spur and only then begun their journey back. The entire concept of a linear timeline, of cause and effect, was unraveling. My reliance on physical evidence to reconstruct a scene, a core protocol, was failing. I couldn't track a ghost who only left traces on their way out. I stood on the ridge spur, the wind picking up, carrying the scent of pine and impending snow. Below, the valley was a black expanse, dotted by the distant, faint lights of the nearest town. The kiosk log, the cold car with fresh prints, the radio's temporal slip, and now the impossible footprints. Each piece of data was solid, undeniable. Yet together they formed a perfect, horrifying contradiction. The hiker was out there, or had been. But the story of their passage, as told by the mountains, was impossible. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't rationalize it. All I could do was report what I found, knowing how absurd it would sound. The cold seeped into my bones, but it wasn't just the temperature. It was the chill of a world that refused to obey its own rules. A trail that held secrets far stranger than any I'd encountered in 12 years. The logbook, sitting back at the trailhead, remained a silent testament to a moment that had occurred twice, yet perhaps not at all. I've been an EMT for a little over 15 years now. Most of that time spent covering the rural districts and the national forest land in the northern part of the state. My partner and I run a heavy-duty Type 1 ambulance, fully equipped for rough terrain, and we're both certified in wilderness rescue. Our job often means long drives, late nights, and calls that range from a twisted ankle on a hiking trail to a full-blown medical emergency miles from the nearest paved road. You learn to rely on your training, your gear, and the steady hum of the radio. That radio, connected to our regional repeater network, is our lifeline out there. It's supposed to be a one-way mirror for sound, reflecting our transmissions to dispatch and other units, not whatever it did that night. It was just past 0200 hours, a Tuesday. The air was crisp, pushing towards freezing, and the sky was clear, showing every star. We were parked at a quiet turnout, catching a few minutes of rest before our shift ended, the engine idling low. The dispatch tone cut through the silence. Unit 4, Code 2, ankle sprain, Pine Ridge Shelter. Patient reports stable, calm, requesting transport. Trail name Shadow. My partner and I exchanged a look. Pine Ridge? I keyed the mic. Dispatch, confirm Pine Ridge Shelter? That structure's been shuttered for renovations for 2 months. Access gates chained, trails rerouted. Dispatch's voice was unperturbed. Affirmative, Unit 4. Patient states they are inside the shelter. Reports a fall, right ankle. Standing by for ETA. This was odd. Pine Ridge Shelter wasn't just closed, it was actively undergoing structural repairs. The main door was supposed to be chained, windows boarded, and the entire area marked off. The access road was gated and padlocked. It was a standard protocol. Once a shelter is closed for safety, it's off limits. Someone being inside it, much less calling from it, was a significant breach. My initial thought was a caretaker or a contractor, but the calm, almost detached voice on the radio, giving a trail name, didn't fit. Copy, dispatch, en route, I confirmed. We flipped on the lights and siren, though out here, the siren was more for wildlife than traffic. The drive to the access gate was about 40 minutes, mostly on unpaved forest roads. The cold air rushed in when we opened the windows briefly, carrying the scent of damp pine needles and decaying leaves. I remember thinking about a call from years ago, a kid who'd fallen out of a tree in a city park. Simple, clean, no locked gates or phantom callers. We reached the access gate for the Pine Ridge Trail system. Just as I remembered, heavy gauge chain, thick padlock, wrapped around the steel frame. Undisturbed. No signs of forced entry, no vehicle tracks beyond what we'd just made. The "closed for renovation" signs were still prominently displayed, now faded by sun and rain. "Well, that's something," my partner mumbled, shining his flashlight on the chain. "No vehicle access," I stated, stating the obvious. "Looks like we're hiking in." We geared up, grabbing the trauma bag, splint kit, and our comms. The trail to the shelter was about 2 miles, a moderate climb. The ground was hard with the cold, leaves crunching under our boots. Our headlamps cut tunnels through the absolute dark. The silence of the forest was profound, broken only by our breathing and the occasional hoot of an owl. It felt heavy, like the air was pressing in. When we finally crested the last rise, the lean-to structure of Pine Ridge Shelter appeared, a dark silhouette against the faint starlight. It was exactly as described. Windows boarded, main door chained shut with another heavy padlock. The plywood sheets over the windows looked weathered, undisturbed. No lights inside, no sound. "Hello, EMT. Anyone here?" I called out, my voice echoing faintly in the still air. My partner repeated the call. Nothing, just the wind rustling through the bare branches. We walked the perimeter, flashlights scanning every inch. No open windows, no broken boards, no hidden entry points. The structure was sealed tight. It was impossible for anyone to be inside, let alone have fallen and be waiting for us. I tried to raise dispatch on the portable radio, but all I got was static, a frustrating hiss. My partner checked his own unit. Same result. I must have been too focused on the physical search, not paying enough attention to the antenna position after the climb. A small oversight, but critical now. Let's head back to the truck. We can use the rig's repeater to call in and check the recording. The trek back felt longer, colder. The initial confusion had given way to a prickly unease. We were trained for the unexpected, but this was beyond the realm of any protocol. Back in the ambulance, I keyed the mic, and the dispatcher's voice came through clear. I explained the situation. Shelter secured, no patient found, no signs of entry. Dispatch acknowledged, sounding as perplexed as we felt. Then, I pulled up the repeater's recording from earlier. Every transmission, every squelch, every silence, captured. I fast-forwarded to the initial call. The patient's calm voice filled the cab. This is Shadow. Ankle sprain, Pine Ridge Shelter. Requesting transport. Then, something twisted in my gut. On the recording, our own voices came through, clear as day. "Who is this?" I heard myself ask. "Can you confirm your location?" My partner's voice followed. "How did you get in there?" And the patient's voice, calm, steady. I fell near the bunks, right ankle. A pause. The door was open. The recording continued, playing out a full, detailed exchange. The patient described the pain, the exact location in the shelter, even mentioned our actual live questions. The ones we'd asked over the radio after the initial call came through on the recording later, followed by silence. The repeater had mirrored our future conversation, playing it back before we'd even thought to ask. My partner and I just sat there, listening to our own voices. Then the patient's impossible answers. Then our voices again, asking the same questions, this time met with dead air. The silence in the cab was colder than the night outside. Then I remembered something. Pine Ridge Shelter, like many older lean-tos, had a small, weather-beaten logbook tucked into a cubby near the bunks. Hikers would sign in, leave notes. It should have been removed when the shelter closed, but maybe it was overlooked. "The logbook," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It might still be there." Against our better judgment, we hiked back. The gate was still chained, the shelter still dark, silent, and locked. This time, we brought a pry bar from the truck. Protocol dictated we needed to ensure no one was genuinely trapped, even if the situation defied logic. We carefully pried open a small, boarded-up window panel, just enough to shine a powerful spotlight inside. Dust motes danced in the beam. Empty bunks, stripped of mattresses. A single, small, wooden cubby. And there it was. A water-stained, spiral-bound notebook. I reached in, careful not to disturb anything else, and pulled it out. The pages were damp, some stuck together. I flipped through, past old entries, trail names, dates. Then I found it. The trail name, Shadow. First entry, Shadow, arrived 0200, 20XX-10-18. Staying for a bit. Good shelter. This was exactly 1 week ago. I flipped to the very next page, the last entry in the book. Shadow, left 0230, 20XX-10-25. Ankle sprain, heading out. Today's date. The same trail name. My partner and I stood there, looking at the logbook, then at the empty, silent shelter, then at each other. The radio recording played in my mind, our questions, answered before we asked them. The calm voice, reporting an injury from a place that was empty and sealed. The logbook, confirming an exit and an injury, but contradicting the presence. We secured the shelter again, leaving the logbook exactly as we found it. No words were exchanged on the drive back. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of static on the radio, a sound that now felt less like a lifeline and more like a whisper from somewhere impossible. I've been a trail crew lead for 15 years, mostly working the backcountry of the Pacific Northwest. My team handles everything from clearing blowdowns to maintaining structures, culverts, retaining walls, and especially footbridges. We're good with timber, good with steel, and we know these mountains like the back of our hands. Safety protocols are second nature, and we rely on our tools and our training. A spirit level, a pry bar, a come-along, a radio. These are extensions of our bodies. When a structure is compromised, it's a hazard, and we treat it with respect. Last Tuesday, after 3 days of relentless rain, dispatch called in a report on the Alder Creek footbridge. A hiker had called it in, said the decking looked like it was listing hard to the east, enough to make them nervous crossing. It was a 60-foot suspension bridge, timber and cable, built decades ago. High water often stressed its anchors, so a tilt wasn't unheard of. We packed out the truck. Levels, shims, a torque wrench for the cable clamps, a couple of heavy-duty pry bars, and a chain hoist. My partner and I were on the trail by 0800 hours. The hike in was standard. 2 hours of steady uphill through soaked hemlock and cedar, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The trail was slick, but we're used to it. We reached the temporary tool cache we'd established near Alder Creek last season. A locked metal box tucked under a rock overhang, just a quarter mile from the bridge. We geared up, grabbed our day packs, and headed for the creek crossing. The Alder Creek footbridge came into view through a stand of young alder. From 50 yards out, it looked normal. Perfectly level. My partner squinted. "That's odd," they said. "Hiker must have been seeing things." I pulled out my phone, started a video log as we approached. Standard procedure for documenting site conditions. The bridge decking was straight, the handrails aligned. No obvious sag, no lean. But as we got closer, a sound became apparent. The creek below, swollen from the rain, was moving fast. The roar of the water was deep, a continuous low-frequency hum that vibrated in the chest. It wasn't just the sound of rushing water, it was a drone, like idling diesel generators running somewhere just out of sight. We stepped onto the bridge. The timber felt solid underfoot. I pulled out my 24-inch spirit level, laid it across the decking. The bubble settled dead center. I moved it to the main stringers, then checked the crossbeams. Each time, the bubble was plumb, no tilt. I checked the main cable anchors, looking for any shift in the bedrock or tension. Everything appeared secure. The drone of the water, however, was intense here, amplified by the bridge structure itself. It felt like the very air was vibrating. I laid the level down again, just to confirm. The bubble danced slightly, a tiny jitter. I tapped the level gently. It stabilized, then resumed its subtle shimmy. I dismissed it as sympathetic vibration from the water. A minor mistake, perhaps, but the visual evidence was clear. "Looks good to me," I said, raising my voice over the drone. My partner nodded, leaning over the railing, staring at the churning water. "That sound, though," they said, their voice tight. "It's heavy." It was. It felt less like sound and more like pressure. A low thrum that burrowed into your ears and resonated in your bones. It was hard to concentrate. I tried to radio dispatch to report the bridge clear, but the drone seemed to interfere. The signal was nothing but static and a distorted echo of the water's hum. We were out of range, or the atmospheric conditions were bad. Abandoning the protocol of immediate reporting, I decided we'd just finish our visual inspection and report back when we had a clearer signal. We walked the full length of the bridge, checking every bolt, every cable clamp. Nothing was loose. The drone of the water seemed to follow us. Or perhaps it was just everywhere. As we stood at the far end, I felt a strange disorientation, a slight lightheadedness. It reminded me of a time in my childhood, standing too close to a bass speaker at a fair, the vibrations rattling my teeth. This was similar but more pervasive, more internal. The water below churned with a dark, oily sheen, moving with a speed that seemed impossible. "Let's get a full video walkthrough, just for the log," I said, holding up my phone again. Confirming no tilt, Alder Creek Bridge. I started recording, panning across the decking, showing the level bubble, then a quick sweep of the creek below. The drone on the recording was even more pronounced, a deep, guttural rumble. We walked back across the bridge, the camera pointed at our boots for a few frames, then up to the decking. The crossing felt long. The drone seemed to intensify, to pull at our focus, drawing our eyes down to the dark water. We reached the other side, the starting point, and I stopped the recording. Back at the tool cache, we packed up our gear. The drone of the water was still audible, but muted here, a background hum. I pulled out my phone to review the video log before we hiked out. The initial frames confirmed our visual assessment. The bridge was perfectly level. My boots crossed the decking, then my partner's. The drone on the recording was unsettling, a constant, low thrum. I fast-forwarded a bit, just to confirm the end of the crossing. Then I froze. The video showed our boots again. My boots, then my partner's. They were crossing the bridge, returning. But we had just completed one crossing for the video. And the cuffs of our rain pants, visible in the frame, were dark with water, soaked up to the shins. My partner and I looked at each other, then back at the phone. Neither of us remembered a second crossing. Neither of us remembered getting our cuffs wet. The drone on the video continued, a steady, low rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate not just the air, but the very fabric of our memory. We stood there, staring at the phone, then back towards the bridge, now hidden by the alder. The drone from the creek was still there, a constant presence. The bridge was level. We had confirmed it. But the video showed something else. Something we had done, but not experienced. We packed the phone away, our movements stiff, and started the long hike back. The drone of Alder Creek, a persistent, unsettling vibration in our ears. I've been a landscape photographer for over 15 years, specializing in the transient beauty of the Pacific Northwest. My work often takes me into remote areas, chasing light through dense forests, or capturing the elusive dance of fog over mountain ridges. It's a job that demands patience, precision, and an intimate understanding of weather patterns. My kit is robust, a full-frame mirrorless body, a suite of prime and zoom lenses, and a heavy-duty carbon fiber tripod. That tripod, a 3-section model with robust twist locks, has seen countless sunrises and sunsets. It's the anchor for every long exposure, the steady hand in gusting winds, and arguably, the most crucial piece of equipment I own. I trust my gear implicitly, and I follow a strict protocol for its deployment and retrieval. A typical shoot begins hours before dawn. I'll check satellite imagery and local forecasts, pack my bag, and often drive for an hour or more to reach a chosen vantage point. This particular morning, the target was an overlook spur known for dramatic fog inversions, about a 2-mile hike from the switchback lot. The forecast predicted a low-lying marine layer pushing inland, perfect for ethereal light. I arrived at the lot around 04:30. The air was still and cool, carrying the sharp scent of damp earth and pine needles, a smell I've always associated with peace and the promise of a good shot. I geared up, headlamp cutting a narrow beam through the pre-dawn gloom, and started up the winding trail. By the time I reached the spur, the fog had already begun its ascent, a thick, silent blanket obscuring the valley below. Visibility dropped to under 20 feet. I set up my camera on the tripod, careful to level it on the uneven ground. The twisting fog offered endless compositions, each frame a study in diffused light and shifting texture. I worked for nearly 2 hours, bracketing exposures, adjusting focus, and waiting for subtle breaks in the mist. My routine is ingrained. Shoot, review, adjust, repeat. When the light began to flatten, signaling the end of the prime shooting window, I started to pack up. I disassembled the camera, stowed the lenses, and cleaned the filters. In the dense fog, with the chill seeping into my fingers, and a growing fatigue from the early start, I remember feeling for the tripod, collapsing its legs and thinking I'd slid it into its padded bag. It was a lapse, a momentary distraction after a long, intense session. I slung my heavy backpack over my shoulders and started the descent. Back at the switchback lot, I tossed my gear into the cargo area of my SUV. The fog had thinned considerably there, revealing the parking spaces and the Trailhead kiosk. I drove home, already planning my next outing. It wasn't until I began to offload my equipment in my studio that I realized my mistake. The tripod bag was missing from the cargo area. A cold dread settled in. I always pack my tripod. It's a core rule. I must have left it at the spur. Annoyed with myself, I turned the SUV around and drove back. The fog had completely burned off by then, revealing a clear, bright morning. I hiked back up the trail. And there it was, standing exactly where I'd left it, a silent sentinel on the overlook spur. The carbon fiber legs were beaded with dew, and a small, fresh dent marred one of the leg locks. A detail I hadn't noticed before, or perhaps dismissed as new wear. Relief washed over me, mixed with self-reproach. I collapsed the legs, secured them, and carefully placed the tripod into its bag. This time, I made sure it was in my hand for the entire walk back to the SUV. I checked it again before driving away. My tripod was safe, my mistake corrected. 3 days later, I was reviewing some images when my phone rang. It was the ranger from the park office, a man I'd spoken with many times over the years. "Hey," he said, "we've got a tripod here in Lost and Found. Looks like yours. Carbon fiber, black bag. Got that little custom tag on the zipper pull." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "My tripod is right here in my studio." I glanced across the room at the corner where it stood, leaning against my gear locker, exactly where I'd left it after cleaning. "Well, this one's got your tag," the ranger insisted, sounding slightly amused. "And it's got a dent on the middle leg lock, just like you described when you called about leaving it the other day." I felt a chill despite the warm air in my studio. I hadn't described the dent to him. I'd only told him I'd left my tripod and retrieved it. I asked him where it had been found. "Near the Trailhead kiosk at the switchback lot," he said. "Someone turned it in yesterday afternoon." I drove back to the park office. The ranger led me to a small storage room. On a shelf, nestled among forgotten water bottles and hiking poles, was a tripod bag. It was identical to mine. The same model, the same faded black fabric, the same unique scuff marks from years of field use. And there, on the middle leg lock, was the exact dent I'd seen on my tripod at the spur. My custom engraved tag, a small metal plate with my unique identifier, dangled from the zipper pull. I picked it up. It had the familiar weight, the same balance. It was my tripod. But my tripod was at home. I felt a cold confusion. This can't be," I mumbled. The ranger just shrugged. "Looks like it is. You want it?" I took it. I had to. It was mine, yet it wasn't. Back in my studio, I placed the new tripod next to my original. They were indistinguishable. Every scuff, every faint scratch, the specific wear on the rubber feet, the dent. It was an impossible duplicate. I only owned one. Then, I noticed something else. Tucked into an interior mesh pocket of the duplicate tripod bag was an SD card. I never leave cards in my bags. I inserted it into my card reader. The card contained 2 distinct sets of sunrise photographs, both taken on the exact same date as my foggy shoot. Both sets were from the Overlook Spur. Both captured the same general compositions, the same valley shrouded in mist. But the atmospheric conditions were subtly different. One set showed a slow, deliberate movement of the fog, with soft, diffused light. The other displayed a more turbulent, faster-moving cloud layer, with sharper highlights breaking through. The timestamps on the files confirmed they were taken within minutes of each other, but the progression of light and cloud motion suggested 2 separate, yet simultaneous, events. I pulled up my own files from that morning. My images matched one of the sets precisely. The other set, with its subtly different light and cloud patterns, was an anomaly. Desperate for some rational explanation, I called the park supervisor, explaining the bizarre situation. He was understandably skeptical, but agreed to review the trail camera footage from the switchback lot. The park had a motion-activated camera positioned to monitor the trailhead, primarily for wildlife and visitor counts. The footage from that morning was retrieved. It clearly showed my SUV arriving at 4:28. It showed me wearing my usual hiking gear, walking up the trail towards the Overlook Spur with my backpack and my tripod in hand. The timestamp was 4:40. The footage then showed me returning to my vehicle at 7:15, appearing to carry a full load of gear, but without the tripod in my hand. Then at 8:32, the camera captured my SUV again, pulling into the lot. It showed me walking back up the trail and then returning at 9:05, this time with the tripod clearly in my hand. The trail cam footage confirmed my single arrival for the initial shoot, my single departure without the tripod, and my single return to retrieve it. It showed no other person, no other vehicle, no other identical tripod, entering or leaving that area during that entire time window. The objective evidence of the camera, a tool I've always relied on for documenting my movements in remote areas, offered no explanation for the second tripod or the second set of photographs. The protocol, the reliable record, simply failed to account for what I held in my hands. I now have two identical carbon fiber tripods, each with the same dent on the leg lock, each bearing my custom tag. 1. I've been a solo hiker for over 2 decades, traversing the backcountry of these western ranges. My pack is an extension of my body, and my navigation skills are honed by thousands of miles. I trust my gear, my GPS unit, my physical map and compass, my emergency beacon. But more than any device, I trust the trails themselves. The blazes, the cairns, the established routes. They are the language of the wilderness, telling you where you are and where you're going. This particular morning, I started early, aiming for a familiar 12-mile loop. The air was crisp, the sky a clean, cloudless blue. I followed the main trail up a long, gentle ridge traverse, the path well maintained and clearly marked with white blazes on the trees. My pace was steady, a comfortable 2.5 miles per hour, and I checked my GPS at regular intervals, confirming my position against the topo map loaded on the device. Everything aligned. The scent of ponderosa pine was strong, a familiar comfort. I stopped for a brief water break at a rocky outcrop, enjoying the panoramic view of the valley below, a patchwork of forest and distant farmland. This was the kind of morning that reminded me why I spent so much time out here. The plan was to take the marked return trail, a slightly steeper descent that cut back towards the trailhead, shaving off a couple of miles from the full loop. This particular shortcut was usually less traveled, but still clearly blazed. In my experience, the blazes are the gospel out here. Clear, consistent, reliable. They represent the consensus of park services, survey teams, and generations of hikers. They are the absolute reference point for distance and direction. I reached the junction just before noon. A fresh white blaze, painted recently, stood out against the weathered bark of an old fir. Attached to the tree directly below it was a small, laminated sign. Return Trail, 0.6 miles to TH. The letters were crisp, the plastic new. I glanced at my GPS. Its screen displayed my current location and, below that, 1.9 miles to Trailhead. My internal clock, honed by miles of walking, also suggested closer to 2 miles, not 0.6. I paused, tapping the screen of my GPS, checking the satellite lock. Full bars. I shrugged it off, assuming my GPS had a momentary lapse, a common enough occurrence in deep forest cover. The blaze was new, official. I trusted the physical marker. I took the return trail. The path immediately narrowed, dropping into a steeper section. The blazes continued, spaced at regular intervals, always white. But something felt off. The ground underfoot was softer, less compacted than I expected for a marked trail. The canopy above was thicker, muffling sound, creating a perpetual twilight. I walked for what felt like 10 minutes, then 20. My internal sense of distance began to protest. At 0.6 miles, I should have been nearly out. I checked my GPS again. It still read 1.9 miles to Trailhead. My heart rate picked up. I dismissed the first anomaly, but the persistent discrepancy was unsettling. I continued, pushing past a distinct deadfall that lay across the path. It was a massive spruce, its root ball torn from the earth, its trunk snapped in two places. One long, gnarled branch reached out like a skeletal arm. I had to climb over it, careful to avoid a splinter. The trail beyond seemed to twist more than I remembered, the blazes appearing at odd angles, sometimes on trees that seemed too far off the main line. The air grew still, heavy. I felt a prickle of unease, a sensation of being watched, though I saw no one. The familiar, comforting scent of pine was replaced by something damp, earthy, and faintly metallic. After another indeterminate stretch, perhaps 15 minutes, I found myself approaching a familiar sight. The same deadfall. The massive spruce, its root ball torn from the earth, its trunk snapped in two. The long, gnarled branch reached out. I recognized the specific break in the trunk, the angle of the roots. I was approaching it from the opposite side, the side I had just left. I had circled back. Or the trail had. My GPS still stubbornly displayed 1.9 miles to Trailhead. I checked my compass. It spun erratically for a moment, then settled, pointing generally south. But it felt wrong. The sun, when I could glimpse it through the thick canopy, seemed to be in the wrong position for the time of day. My reliance on the blazes had led me in a loop. Or something worse. This was not a simple navigational error. I tried to retrace my steps, but the path behind me seemed to shift, the blazes I'd just passed now appearing faded, or on different trees altogether. Panic began to set in. I pulled out my emergency satellite communicator, a device I always kept charged and ready. I pressed the power button. No response. I pressed it again. Nothing. The battery indicator was dark, despite being fully charged that morning. My heart pounded against my ribs. The protocol for lost hikers: stay put, conserve energy, signal for help, was impossible if my primary communication device was dead, and the trail itself was unreliable. I moved forward, trying to find a recognizable landmark, a cut bank I remembered from previous hikes. I found a cut bank, steep and eroded, but it didn't look right. The soil was a different color, the vegetation on its face unfamiliar. It was like a distorted echo of a place I knew. After what felt like an eternity of disoriented walking, stumbling down a final steep slope, I broke out onto asphalt. The trailhead. The familiar kiosk stood sentinel, its information board weathered but intact. I checked the map posted there. The return trail, the one I had taken, was clearly marked, and its length was indeed 1.9 miles, consistent with my GPS, not the 0.6 miles blaze. My exhaustion. I've been a volunteer trail monitor and maintenance lead for this district for 8 seasons now. My territory covers the western slopes of the Cascades, a network of trails ranging from easy day hikes to multi-day backcountry routes. I know these paths, the way the light shifts through the Douglas firs, the particular scent of damp earth after a summer rain. the sound of the wind through the pines at elevation. My kit is standard: brush saw, folding rake, a two-way radio, GPS unit, a chest-mounted action camera, and a waterproof logbook. My primary directive is simple: keep the trails clear, report hazards, and ensure visitor safety. The core protocol, the one drilled into every volunteer and ranger, is to always stick to the marked path, no exceptions. It's for your safety, and for the safety of anyone who might need to follow your tracks. It was late afternoon, the sun already dipping behind the western ridges, casting long shadows across the trail. I was on the lower ridge loop, a relatively easy 6-mile stretch, performing a final sweep before the season's end. The air had a sharp, cold edge, promising an early frost. I was about 2 miles from the main parking lot, nearing the split for the old fire lookout access road, a section I knew well. My focus was on clearing a patch of recent windfall, a small cluster of alder branches that had fallen across the path, obscuring a critical trail marker. I pulled out the saw, the low hum of the motor a familiar comfort. As I finished, wiping sawdust from my gloves, I heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the lookout split. Not heavy hiking boots, but lighter, quicker steps. A moment later, a man emerged from the deepening shadows. He was dressed in a light windbreaker and jeans, no pack, no water bottle, no discernible hiking gear. His hands were empty. This immediately struck me as odd. Even on a short loop like this, most people carried at least a fanny pack or a small day bag. "Afternoon," I said, nodding. My camera was running, as it always was during sweeps, recording trail conditions and any unusual encounters. It was standard procedure. The man stopped, a few feet away. He was of average height, with a lean build, but he didn't quite meet my gaze. His eyes flickered past me, towards the darkening trees. "You heading back to the lot?" he asked, his voice low, almost a murmur against the rising wind. "That's the plan," I replied. "Just finishing up here." He gestured vaguely with his chin towards a dense thicket of firs just off the main trail, where a barely discernible game path snaked into the undergrowth. "There's an old way, cuts 20 minutes off the walk. Comes out right by the main gate. Real shortcut." I frowned. I knew every inch of this trail system. There was no sanctioned shortcut there. The only old way I knew of in that area was a disused logging trace, long since reclaimed by nature and prone to washouts. "We stick to the marked trails," I said, gesturing to the orange blazes on the trees. It's for safety." He offered a quick, almost dismissive shrug. "Suit yourself. Just thought I'd mention it. It's a real time saver if you know the route." He still hadn't fully faced me, his head slightly angled, his eyes darting. My camera, mounted on my chest harness, would have captured his profile at best. For a brief moment, fatigue from the day's work and the thought of shaving off 20 minutes crossed my mind. The sun was fading fast, and the temperature was dropping quickly. It was a momentary lapse, a small, unprofessional consideration, quickly dismissed. The protocol was clear. "Thanks for the tip," I said, "but I'll stick to the loop." He didn't respond. Instead, he simply turned, not towards the main trail, but directly into the thicket he'd indicated, vanishing between the firs without another word. No rustle of leaves, no snapping twigs, just gone. It was too quiet. I stood there for a moment, the hum of the brush saw still echoing in my ears, a prickle of unease starting in my gut. His lack of gear, his evasiveness, the insistence on an unmarked path at dusk. It all felt wrong. I pulled out my logbook and jotted down the details. Time, location, a brief description of the man, and the interaction. I noted the anomaly. Unusual behavior, suggested unmarked route. The distinct smell of damp earth and decaying fir needles, usually a comforting scent, now felt heavy, almost cloying in the cooling air. I finished my sweep, the remaining mile feeling longer than usual. The light was almost gone by the time I reached the main parking lot. My truck was the last vehicle. I logged out with the district ranger on duty via radio. I mentioned the encounter, describing the man and his strange offer. The ranger, busy with end-of-day paperwork, seemed to dismiss it as a quirky local trying to be helpful. Probably just an old-timer who knows the woods better than the maps. Happens sometimes, he said. I didn't press it, but the unease lingered. I remember a similar, harmless encounter years ago. An elderly hiker who just wanted to point out a rare bird's nest. This felt different. That night, I reviewed the camera footage from the chest cam. Frame by frame, I tried to catch a clear shot of the man's face. Each time, he was either turned away, obscured by his shoulder, or his head was down. It was almost as if he was deliberately avoiding the lens. The next morning, I was assigned to a different section, a higher elevation trail. Around 0900 hours, a call came through the radio. Dispatch reported a missing person, a hiker, last seen yesterday afternoon near the Lower Ridge Loop Split. The description was vague. Male, average height, light jacket. But the location immediately hit me. It was the same area where I'd encountered the shortcut guy. My report from the previous evening was quickly pulled. The ranger from last night called me directly. "You said he was heading into the trees, off trail?" he asked, his voice now tight with urgency. "Near that old logging trace?" "Yes," I confirmed. He called it the old way. A search and rescue team, Unit 2, was immediately dispatched to the area. I joined them, guiding them to the exact spot. The ground was still damp from the previous night's dew, but there were no clear footprints. After about an hour of searching the dense undergrowth, one of the team members called out, "Flagging! Crude, but it's here." They had found strips of bright orange flagging tape tied to branches, leading away from the main trail, deeper into the woods where the man had disappeared. It wasn't standard Park Service flagging. It looked like cheap surveyor's tape, hastily tied. We followed the flagging. It led us through increasingly difficult terrain, over fallen logs and through dense brush, until it abruptly ended at the edge of a steep, washed-out draw. The ground here was unstable, a sheer drop of about 30 feet to a rocky creek bed below. It was a death trap. No sign of the missing hiker, or any recent disturbance in the mud at the bottom. The draw was too dangerous for a full ground search without rappelling gear. The team. My shift as a SAR coordinator usually begins before dawn, especially when a beacon activation lights up the console. For 12 years, I've overseen operations in this mountain range, a labyrinth of granite peaks and dense timber. I know the drainages, the saddles, the unpredictable microclimates. My tools are satellite imagery, high-frequency radio, and the unwavering precision of GPS. A PLB signal is the bedrock of our response, A distress call with an exact location. A digital breadcrumb leading directly to someone in trouble. It's a system I trust implicitly. This morning, the first alert came in at 4:17. A 406 MHz beacon, registered to a solo hiker. Standard procedure. I pulled up the initial coordinates. 47.8821 degrees north. 121.3456 degrees west. This placed the signal in the lower reaches of the West Fork drainage, a steep, heavily wooded valley known for its treacherous stream crossings. I started the usual protocols. Confirm registration. Check weather. Alert the helicopter unit. 8 minutes later, at 4:25, a second set of coordinates hit the system from the same beacon ID. This time, 47.8893 degrees north, 121.3387 degrees west. My eyes flicked between the 2 points on the topo map. They weren't a cluster, not a drift. These were 2 distinct locations, separated by almost a kilometer, on opposite sides of a prominent saddle that divided the West Fork from the East Fork drainage. The first signal was deep in West Fork. The second was higher up, just below the saddle, on the East Fork side. I stared at the screen, a knot tightening in my stomach. A PLB doesn't do that. Multipath interference can cause minor shifts, a scatter of points around a true location, but never 2 perfectly distinct, stable locations, 8 minutes apart in separate valleys. It was like watching a single star split into 2 and then move independently. I checked the raw data, the satellite passes. Everything indicated valid pings from both locations. Dispatch, confirm beacon ID and coordinates for 0417 and 0425 activations. I radioed, my voice flat. Confirmed, coordinator, same ID, 2 distinct locations, came the crisp reply. We're seeing the same thing. My primary protocol for a PLB activation is clear. Prioritize the most recent, strongest signal, then triangulate. But what if both were strong? What if both were recent? The system was designed for certainty, not contradiction. This was a violation of the fundamental rule. The helicopter pilot, an experienced hand named Top, was already prepping his bird at the helipad. I briefed him on the anomaly. Fly a line between these 2 points, Top. Start low in West Fork, work your way up over the saddle, and then down into East Fork. Look for anything out of place, especially an orange tarp. The hiker's gear list mentioned one. Copy that, coordinator. Top's voice crackled over the radio. 2 pings, 1 beacon. Got it. The sun was just breaking over the eastern peaks, casting long, stark shadows across the valleys as Top lifted off. I watched his progress on my tracking screen, a small icon moving steadily along the designated flight path. The air in the command center was thick with the smell of stale coffee and ozone from the equipment. I remember thinking about a search years ago, a simple one where a family had just gotten turned around on a well-marked trail. We'd found them by noon, cold but otherwise fine. This felt different. Coordinator, I've got something. Top's voice cut through the hum of the machines. Orange tarp, West Fork drainage. Coordinates, 47.8820 degrees north, 121.3457 degrees west. Looks like the first ping location. Copy that, Top. Maintain visual. Can you see any person? Negative. Just the tarp, lying flat. Looks like it's been there a bit, maybe secured with rocks. Distinct tear near the southeast corner. I noted the coordinates. They were almost precisely the first PLB ping. This was progress. All right, Top. Continue your sweep towards the second ping. Get a good look at the saddle. Top acknowledged and continued his flight. I watched his icon move, tracing the contours of the ridge. He made a wide turn, dipping slightly into the East Fork drainage, then began his return sweep, flying back towards the saddle and the West Fork. "Coordinator, I'm seeing the orange tarp again," Top reported, his voice tinged with confusion. "Same tear, same general size. But I'm in the East Fork drainage now. My current position is 47.8892 degrees north, 121.3388 degrees west. This is the second ping location." I leaned closer to the map. "Top, are you absolutely certain it's the same tarp? Could it be another one?" I asked, a flicker of doubt in my own assessment. Maybe he was just tired, mistaking a similar object. It was early, and the light could play tricks. "Coordinator, I'm certain. That tear, the way it's folded, the color. It's the same tarp. It's right where the second ping came from, but I just saw it in West Fork." There was a pause. Unless I'm losing my mind up here, my mistake was dismissing his initial confusion. I should have pressed him more, asked for more details about his flight path and visual confirmation. Instead, I was too focused on the GPS data on my screen, which insisted on two distinct locations. "All right, Top. Stay high. We're deploying ground teams. Can you guide them in?" I ordered, ignoring the chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't just a split signal anymore. It was a split reality. I dispatched 2 ground teams. Team 1 heading into West Fork, and Team 2 tasked with the more arduous climb to the East Fork location. Their primary objective: locate the orange tarp and any sign of the hiker. The protocol of targeting a single, confirmed location was effectively abandoned. We were now searching for an object that seemed to exist in 2 places at once. The hike was brutal. I tracked their progress, listening to their terse radio updates. The peculiar smell of damp earth and pine needles, sharp and cold, filled the air every time a ground team reported crossing a stream or pushing through thick undergrowth. It was a detail I logged, but knew was irrelevant to the core mystery. Hours later, Team 1 reported in. "Coordinator, we've reached the tarp. Confirmed location, 47.8821 degrees north, 121.3456 degrees west. No sign of the hiker. Beacon is not here, but there's writing on the tarp." "Copy that, Team 1. Describe the writing." "It's in black Sharpie, Coordinator. On the northwest corner it reads, 47.8821 degrees north, 121.3456 degrees west. And on the southeast corner it reads, 47.8893 degrees north, 121.3387 degrees west. Both sets of coordinates are here." I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. "Team 1, confirm the handwriting. Does it appear to be the same person who wrote both sets of coordinates?" "Affirmative, Coordinator. Definitely the same hand. Distinct loops on the 7s, specific cross on the 4s. No doubt." I relayed the information to Team 2, who were still slogging through the East Fork drainage. "Team 2, be advised. Team 1 has located the tarp. It has coordinates written on it, including your target coordinates." "Copy that, Coordinator. We're still pushing for the East Fork location. We're seeing what looks like disturbed ground, maybe a small campsite, but no tarp yet." Another half-hour passed. Then, Team 2's voice, strained and disbelieving. "Coordinator, we're at the tarp. The orange tarp. Our GPS reads 47.8893 degrees north, 121.3387 degrees west. It's the same tarp top described, the same tear, and the coordinates, they're written right here, on the corners, same handwriting. I sat back, my hand hovering over the keyboard. Both teams, separated by a kilometer of rugged terrain, were reporting the same physical tarp. The tarp was in two places, yet it was undeniably one object. The PLB had gone silent. The hiker was still missing. We called off the active search for the hiker, transitioning to a recovery effort given the lack of any further sign. The incident report was filed as unexplained, citing probable GPS multipath anomaly with secondary data corruption. But the data wasn't corrupted. It was consistent. The helicopter pilot's log, the PLB pings, and now the ground team's reports all insisted on two locations. Yet, the physical evidence, the tarp itself, insisted on one, while simultaneously contradicting itself. We pulled the tarp out. It was just a piece of orange nylon, heavy with damp earth. No other clues, no signs of a person, no gear. Just those numbers, etched in Sharpie. A silent, impossible riddle. I still review the case file sometimes, late at night. The photos of the tarp, the flight paths, the GPS logs. Every piece of information confirms the impossible. It's not just the data that split that day. It feels like the very ground beneath our feet did too. The first hard frost of the season always meant an early start. As a trail maintainer for this district, with 13 years on the job, I'd learned that the initial freeze brought its own set of checks. Ice on the gravel roads, slick spots on the wooden bridges, and the subtle shift in the forest's acoustics. Today was no different. My shift started at 050 LAF. The air temperature gauge on the dash read 28 degrees Fahrenheit. My breath plumed. I logged my departure from the district office, noting the vehicle mileage and a quick visual inspection of the truck. Standard procedure. My route took me up the old service road to the high country, checking gates and kiosks before the day hikers arrived. The truck's tires crunched over the gravel, a sound that usually vibrated through the floorboards but felt oddly muted this morning. The sky was still a deep, bruised purple, hinting at the sunrise to come. My first stop was the Eagle Ridge pullout, a small gravel lot with a single information kiosk and a chained gate leading to a restricted trail. I pulled the truck in, parking facing east to catch the first light. The gravel lot was covered in a delicate white crust, the first freeze of the year having left its mark. Every stone, every stray pine needle was outlined in hoarfrost. It was beautiful in a stark, cold way. I grabbed my camera, logbook, and radio, stepping out. The air hit me, sharp and clean. My boots left clear impressions in the frosted gravel. This was my core protocol, documenting conditions, especially early season hazards. Every track, every fallen branch, Every sign of human or animal activity was part of the story the trail told. Tracks were especially important. They always had an origin, a destination, a narrative. As I approached the kiosk, my eyes scanned the ground. And that's when I saw them. My first thought was a late-night hiker. Maybe someone who'd gotten lost, or was doing some kind of strange ritual. But as I got closer, the anomaly became impossible to ignore. Each print was deep, deeper than my own, clearly pressing through the frost and into the damp earth beneath. But there was no approach, no tracks leading to the circle, and no tracks leading away from it. They simply began and ended in a perfect, unbroken loop around the kiosk. I walked the perimeter of the pullout, my own boots crunching, searching for any other sign. Nothing, just my fresh tracks and the inexplicable circle. I took out my camera, a rugged field model, and began documenting. Wide shots, close-ups, shots with my own boot next to one of the prints for scale. The prints were clearly a heavy work boot, aggressive tread, size indeterminate but large. I estimated at least a 200-pound individual, given the depth. I knelt, tracing the outline of one print with a gloved finger. The edges were sharp, unfrosted within the impression, suggesting they were made after the frost had set, but not long after. I stood, feeling a prickle on the back of my neck. My eyes went to the information board on the kiosk. One of the laminated maps was peeling at the corner, and the main photo, a vibrant shot of the valley in autumn, was dated 5 years ago. It was a detail I'd meant to report for replacement. A small oversight on my part from the previous season. Just a minor, irrelevant detail. But it added to the sense of things being slightly off. I pulled out my handheld audio meter, a tool I used for assessing potential rockfall or wind tunnel effects. The needle immediately jumped, fluctuating between 15 and 20 decibels, indicating a moderate wind. But the trees around me, tall pines and cedars, stood absolutely still. Not a single branch swayed. The air was dead calm. I tapped the meter, thinking it was faulty. I'd had issues with the battery connection before. A small mistake in not fully charging it last night. But the reading remained consistent, a steady hum of phantom wind. I tried my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4, checking in from Eagle Ridge pullout." Static, just a low hiss. I tried again, adjusting the antenna. Nothing. The normal range for this area was usually solid. The noise inversion, a known phenomenon where cold air traps sound, could explain the muted crunch of my tires, but not the meter reading against a still environment, nor the complete radio silence. It felt like the air itself was swallowing the sound. I walked over to the gate chain, checking the padlock. It was secure, untouched. No signs of forced entry, no tracks leading beyond the gate. The restricted trail was clear. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation for the prints. A helicopter drop? Unlikely, and still wouldn't explain the lack of approach. A very elaborate prank? Possible, but the sheer effort for such an isolated spot seemed excessive. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The silence, broken only by the phantom wind on my meter, was becoming oppressive. I remembered a summer evening years ago, sitting on my porch, listening to the crickets and the distant rumble of a train, the world alive with sound. This place now felt hollowed out, I walked back to the kiosk, circling the prints again. This time I noticed something else. Or perhaps my mind was playing tricks. The prints, especially the ones directly opposite my truck, seemed slightly deeper, as if the weight had pressed down further since I first saw them. It was impossible, of course. No one had been here. I was the only one. My procedural training kicked in. Secure the scene, report the anomaly. But what was the anomaly? Impossible footprints and a phantom wind. How do you log that? Unit 4 reports prints of unknown origin. No approach departure. Possible localized atmospheric anomaly affecting sound readings. It sounded insane. The protocol for unexplained tracks usually involved calling in a ranger unit. But without a clear entry-exit, what would they even investigate? The prints themselves were the only evidence. I made a decision. I would not report the phantom wind or the deepening prints. I couldn't. It would sound like I was cracking. I would report the tracks but frame it as unusual activity, omitting the most unsettling details. It felt like abandoning a core protocol, failing to provide a complete and accurate account. But my gut told me that full disclosure would only lead to questions about my own judgment. I got back into the truck, my hands shaking slightly as I keyed the ignition. The engine roared to life, a welcome, solid sound. I checked the audio meter again. Still showing wind. Still no movement in the trees. I looked back at the kiosk. The circle of prints remained, stark against the white frost. A perfect, inexplicable loop. I backed out of the pullout, my headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom, leaving my own tracks superimposed over the mystery. I knew I wouldn't be able to explain what I saw. Not fully. And I knew I wouldn't be able to forget it. The first hard frost of the season always meant an early start. As a trail maintainer for this district, with 13 years on the job, I'd learned that the initial freeze brought its own set of checks. Ice on the gravel roads, slick spots on the wooden bridges, and the subtle shift in the forest's acoustics. Today was no different. My shift started at 0500. The air temperature gauge on the dash read 28 degrees Fahrenheit. My breath plumed. I logged my departure from the district office, noting the vehicle mileage. And a quick visual inspection. My route took me up the old service road to the high country, checking gates and kiosks before the day hikers arrived. The truck's tires crunched over the gravel, a sound that usually vibrated through the floorboards, but felt oddly muted this morning. The sky was still a deep, bruised purple, hinting at the sunrise to come. My first stop was the Eagle Ridge pullout, a small gravel lot with a single information kiosk and a chained gate leading to a restricted trail. I pulled the truck in, parking facing east to catch the first light. The gravel lot was covered in a delicate white crust, the first freeze of the year having left its mark. Every stone, every stray pine needle, was outlined in hoarfrost. It was beautiful, in a stark, cold way. I grabbed my camera, logbook, and radio, stepping out. The air hit me, sharp and clean. My boots left clear impressions in the frosted gravel. This was my core protocol, documenting conditions, especially early season hazards, Every track, every fallen branch, every sign of human or animal activity was part of the story the trail told. Tracks were especially important. They always had an origin, a destination, a narrative. As I approached the kiosk, my eyes scanned the ground. And that's when I saw them. Boot prints. A perfect circle of them, clockwise, around the kiosk. My first thought was a late-night hiker, maybe someone who'd gotten lost or was doing some kind of strange ritual. But as I got closer, the anomaly became impossible to ignore. Each print was deep, deeper than my own, clearly pressing through the frost and into the damp earth beneath. But there was no approach. No tracks leading to the circle, and no tracks leading away from it. They simply began and ended in a perfect, unbroken loop around the kiosk. I walked the perimeter of the pullout, my own boots crunching, searching for any other sign. Nothing. Just my fresh tracks and the inexplicable circle. I took out my camera, a rugged field model, and began documenting. Wide shots, close-ups, shots with my own boot next to one of the prints for scale. The prints were clearly a heavy work boot, aggressive tread, size indeterminate but large. I estimated at least a 200-pound individual, given the depth. I knelt, tracing the outline of one print with a gloved finger. The edges were sharp, unfrosted within the impression, suggesting they were made after the frost had set, but not long after. I stood, feeling a prickle on the back of my neck. My eyes went to the information. I've been a seasonal ranger for 3 seasons now, mostly covering the high desert and canyon country. This particular district is known for its flash flood potential. The geology here, deep, narrow slot canyons carved by millennia of water, means that even a distant shower can turn a dry wash into a raging torrent in minutes. My primary tool, beyond the standard radio and first aid kit, is a handheld weather meter and a constant feed from the National Weather Service radar. We live by that radar. It's the first thing I check every morning, and I keep tabs on it throughout my shift, especially when I'm out on patrol. This past spring, the snowpack had been heavy, and the ground was saturated. We'd had a few close calls already, but nothing truly catastrophic. The creeks were running higher than usual, even without rain. My morning patrol started like any other. I logged out with dispatch at 700, confirming my route. A 12-mile loop through the lower canyon, checking trail markers and a couple of the more exposed footbridges. The weather radar showed scattered, very light rain cells moving across the northern part of the district, miles upstream from my location. Nothing heavy, nothing concentrated, the kind of rain that barely wets the ground. My weather meter, calibrated that morning, read 18 degrees Celsius, 65% humidity, and a steady barometric pressure. Normal. I reached the first footbridge, a steel and cable structure spanning a 20-foot slot in the canyon wall, around 9:30. The creek below, usually a clear, shallow stream, was running high, but still well within its banks. The water had a muddy tint, which wasn't unusual after recent snowmelt. I paused, checked the upstream view, then the downstream. Everything appeared stable. I recorded my observations in my field log, took a quick reference photo with my GoPro, and continued on. My route then took me along a higher bench trail, offering intermittent views of the creek. Around 10:45, I heard it. A change in the creek's voice. It wasn't the usual gurgle and rush. It was a deeper, more resonant thrum, like a distant, sustained drumbeat. My stomach tightened. I pulled out the radio, called dispatch. Unit 1 to dispatch. Copy. I'm hearing a significant increase in creek noise on the lower canyon trail. Radar still showing light activity north? Dispatch to Unit 1. Affirmative, Unit 1. Radar still showing minimal scattered cells. Nothing indicating a flood event. No reports from upstream sensors. Advise caution. I acknowledged, but the unease persisted. The creek's sound was intensifying. I pushed my pace, heading for the second footbridge, which spanned a much wider but still constricted section of the creek. This bridge was a key crossing point for several popular trails, and I knew it was vulnerable. It was also my designated turnaround point if conditions deteriorated. When I reached the bridge access point at 11:10, the sight stopped me cold. The creek had risen dramatically. The water was no longer just muddy, it was a churning brown-gray soup carrying small branches and foam. The water level was already lapping at the steel supports of the bridge, a good 3 feet higher than when I'd checked the first bridge an hour and a half earlier. This rate of rise was impossible given the radar data. I'd seen flash floods before, but they always corresponded to heavy, localized rain. This was different. I pulled out my radio again, my voice tighter than I liked. Unit 1 to dispatch. This is an urgent advisory. Creek at the main footbridge is in full flood stage. Water level is at the bridge deck. I repeat, bridge deck. I'm abandoning my planned route, advising all units to pull back from lower canyon trails immediately. Requesting Unit 2 for assistance with trail closures at the canyon mouth. Dispatch to Unit 1. Copy, Unit 1. Sending out general advisory. Unit 2 is en route. Are you clear of the bridge? I was standing perhaps 50 feet from the bridge entrance, on solid ground. I could see the water surging under it. Then, I felt a vibration through the rock under my boots. A low, grinding rumble. It wasn't the water itself. It was something else. A faint rattling sound started, like a handful of gravel being shaken in a tin can. It was coming from the bridge. Pebbles. The water was moving fast enough to pick up streambed material. Negative, dispatch. I am clear of the immediate bridge structure. But I need to pull back to higher ground. This is moving too fast. I didn't wait for a response. I started moving, quickly, away from the creek bed, scrambling up a steep, rocky slope that served as an emergency access route. It was a brutal climb, adding hours to my return journey, but it was the only way out now. The standard trail was underwater. As I climbed, I glanced back. The bridge was still there, but the water was now flowing over the deck. A large cottonwood log, ripped from somewhere upstream, slammed into one of the steel supports, shuttering the entire structure. I could hear the groan of metal over the roar of the water. I kept climbing, my lungs burning, the pungent smell of wet earth and crushed sage filling my nostrils. It was an odd detail, that smell, usually a comforting scent of the desert after a rare rain. But now it felt like a prelude to something terrible. I remembered a hike with my sibling years ago, after a gentle spring shower. The air clean and sweet with that same scent. No hint of the raw power I was witnessing now. I finally reached a high overlook, a good 500 feet above the creek, around 1300. From here, I could see the entire bend in the canyon, including a large debris fan where the creek usually spread out a bit. The creek was a brown monster, a mile-wide swath of churning water and debris. The footbridge was gone, completely submerged, or perhaps swept away. I couldn't tell. The sun, which had been bright earlier, was now obscured by a thin, hazy cloud cover, making the light flat and diffused. It felt much later than 1300. The climb had taken a toll, but the sun angle seemed to contradict the hours I'd spent. I set up my tripod and mounted my GoPro, aiming it downstream to capture the flood's progression. I wanted evidence of the scale of this event, especially given the radar's conflicting data. I filmed for about 20 minutes, capturing the relentless flow. I noted a particularly distinctive logjam, a gnarled mass of roots and broken timber, caught in a swirling eddy before being dragged downstream. I zoomed in on it, making sure to get clear footage. I eventually made my way back to the ranger station, arriving exhausted around 1700. The supervisor was already there, reviewing the radar data and talking to dispatch. Unit 2 had confirmed the bridge was gone. The entire lower canyon was impassable. The radar still shows nothing to explain this, the supervisor said, gesturing at the screen, which displayed a benign green cloud pattern. Light showers, max. We've checked all the upstream gauges. They spiked, but not like this. Not for this long. It's like a phantom flood. I downloaded my GoPro footage. We sat and watched it on the monitor. The raw, terrifying power of the water filled the screen. We saw the logjam I'd focused on, clearly identifiable by a specific broken branch and a patch of white bark. It moved past a distinctive rock formation on the bank. I checked the timestamp. 13/17/42. The footage continued. More churning water, more debris. Then, at 13:22:51, less than 5 minutes later, the exact same logjam appeared again. The same gnarled roots, the same broken branch, the same white bark. It passed the same rock formation, moving at the same speed. We watched it again. And again. The supervisor leaned forward, his face pale. That's impossible, he murmured. The current is one way. It doesn't go upstream. We checked the timestamps. We rewound. We fast-forwarded. The footage was continuous. No breaks, no glitches. It simply showed the same unique mass of timber passing the same point, 5 minutes apart. There was no logical explanation. The creek was flowing downstream, relentlessly. A logjam cannot simply reappear upstream and pass the same point again. It violated every physical law we understood. We sent the footage to Regional Command. They ran it through analysis software, checking for digital manipulation, for camera errors. Nothing. The footage was clean. The radar data remained unchanged. The upstream gauges, when reviewed against the GoPro timestamps, showed a single massive surge, not a repeated one. The flood eventually receded. The canyon was devastated. But the anomaly, the impossible repetition captured on my GoPro, remained. It was logged as an incident, filed under unexplained hydrological event. We patrol those canyons still. But now, when the radar shows light rain, when the creek starts to hum, I feel a different kind of dread. Not just the fear of the water, but the chilling certainty that sometimes the world doesn't play by the rules we think we understand, and that sometimes time itself, or at least our perception of it, can bend and break in ways we can't comprehend. I've been the lead archivist for the Regional Wilderness Search and Rescue Operations for 13 years. My office is a quiet corner of the main facility, a climate-controlled space filled with rows of metal cabinets, microfilm readers, and the low hum of servers. My job is to maintain the integrity of every incident report, every dispatch log, every field note. A digital and physical record of every call, every deployment, every life touched by the wild lands we monitor. Accuracy is paramount. Our system relies on absolute fidelity to the timeline, to the facts as they were recorded, because lives depend on lessons learned from past events. My tools are scanners, databases, and an intimate knowledge of the physical archive, down to the dust motes on the oldest ledger pages. My routine is bedrock. Each morning I review new incoming reports, cross-reference them with existing data, and prepare older physical records for digitization. That Tuesday, my task was to pull all incident cards from the second week of October, specifically focusing on the year 2 decades prior, for a long-term trend analysis report for the new director. I'd been at it for hours, the rhythm of scanning and data entry almost hypnotic. The air in the archive always carried a faint, dry scent of aged paper and ozone from the old microfilm reader, a smell that had become as familiar as my own office chair. I reached the stack for October 12th. The first card detailed a hiker extraction from Bear Creek Trail, grid sector 7G. A solo male, mid-40s, sustained a lower leg fracture. Extraction by ground team 1437 local time. Barometric pressure reading, 29.98 inches of mercury. Initialed by the supervisor who retired just last year. Standard, clear. I scanned it, logged the metadata, and moved to the next. The second card in the stack also read October 12th. My eyes skimmed it, expecting a different incident. But no. Hiker extraction. Bear Creek Trail. Grid sector 7G. My brow furrowed. Same date, same location, same incident type. My first thought was a duplicate entry. A common enough clerical error from the days before our integrated digital system. Sometimes, a field team would submit a preliminary card and then a more detailed one, and the original wouldn't be properly purged. It was my job to catch these and ensure only the most accurate, complete record remained. I made a mental note to check the physical logbook for that day, a protocol for reconciling such discrepancies. I quickly cross-referenced the details. Solo male, mid-40s, lower leg fracture. Extraction by ground team, 1437 local time. Everything matched. Until I reached the barometric pressure. This second card read 30.05 in Hiricard land. A small difference, but significant in weather prediction and incident logging. And it was also initialed by the same retired supervisor. My initial thought, that it was a simple duplicate, wavered. Why would a supervisor initial 2 cards for the exact same incident with a key data point altered? It wasn't a typo. 2998 and 3005 are distinct readings. I pulled up the digitized weather records for that specific October 12th. The official station log showed 2999 in Hiricard at 1400, steadily rising to 30.01 by 1500. Neither card perfectly matched, but 2998 was closer to the early afternoon reading. The 30.05 reading was an outlier. This was more than a clerical error. Our core protocol, one incident, one record, was fundamentally challenged. I couldn't simply delete one card, both had the official sign-off. I decided to dig deeper. I pulled the physical logbook for the year. The handwritten entry for October 12th, Bear Creek Trail, confirmed the 2998 in-here card reading. No mention of a second incident or an altered pressure. This meant the 30.05 card was the true anomaly, a ghost in the machine. But it was there. I spent the next hour scrutinizing the two cards under a magnifying glass. The paper stock was identical. The ink, while faded, appeared to be from the same type of pen. Even the supervisor's initials, a distinctive looping script, were indistinguishable. It was as if two identical events had occurred, differing only in a single, precise environmental measurement. It felt like an impossible trick of light, or a subtle fatigue in my own eyes, though I'd just had my afternoon coffee. I briefly remembered an October 12th from my childhood, a crisp, clear autumn day spent raking leaves in my grandmother's yard. A day utterly devoid of such baffling contradictions. I moved to the map wall, a vast, laminated topographical chart covering an entire wall of my office. I located grid sector 7G, tracing the Bear Creek Trail. It was a well-used path, prone to rockfalls and slippery sections. I pulled up the incident photos from the digital archive for that specific rescue. The photos, dated October 12th, showed the extraction team, the injured hiker, and the surrounding terrain. No discrepancies there. The weather in the photos looked consistent with a barometric pressure around 30.00 instant, partly cloudy, no strong winds. Frustrated, I leaned back, my gaze drifting to the radio shelf above my main workstation. On it sat an assortment of older, decommissioned field radios and scanners, some kept for parts, others for historical reference. Among them was the old Model 500 handheld, the workhorse of our field teams for years. I picked it up, a sudden impulse, wanting to test its old recording function. I hadn't used one in years, but sometimes old tech held unexpected answers. I powered it on, the LCD screen flickering to life. I pressed the test tone button. A short, sharp burst of static-laced audio filled the quiet office. Before I could press record, a voice crackled from a different radio on the shelf. A dusty, older base station unit, one that hadn't been powered on in years, or so I thought. It was tuned to the primary SAR frequency. The voice was faint, distorted, but unmistakably human. Unit 4, check in. Barometric pressure 30.05. Repeat, 30.05. Bear Creek extraction, 1437. The voice was familiar. It was the supervisor who had retired last year. His younger self, perhaps. The static was heavy, but the words were clear enough. My heart hammered. The base station radio should have been silent. It wasn't even connected to power. I checked the power cord. It lay coiled on the shelf, unplugged. The radio was cold to the touch. Yet, the transmission had been undeniable. A direct response to my test tone, echoing the precise, anomalous barometric reading from the second incident card. I stared at the two cards on my desk, then at the silent, unplugged radio. The first card, 29.98 inklage, aligned with the logbook and the general weather data. The second, 30.05 inklage, had just been confirmed by a phantom transmission from a dead radio. A transmission that shouldn't exist. From a day that seemed to have been logged twice. The supervisor's initials on both cards. Once a mark of verification, now felt like an impossible signature across two diverging realities. The quiet hum of the servers, the dry scent of old paper. Everything that grounded my world in order and fact suddenly felt fragile, permeable. I had 2 records for the same day, the same event, and no protocol for a day that had, somehow, happened twice.